Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet the US President Joe Biden on the sidelines of the UNGA meeting in New York. The leaders are expected to discuss prospects to long-term peace in the region vis-a-vis the Palestine and Iran issue. The US President is also likely to bring up Israel's contentious judicial reform plans with the Prime Minister. Now, the US is discussing terms of a mutual defense treaty with Saudi Arabia as an incentive to normalize ties with Israel. Biden also mentioned the benefits of nations normalizing ties with Israel in his UNGA speech on Tuesday. The proposal is also expected to come up as Biden meets Netanyahu in New York. The Biden-Netanyahu meeting comes almost 9 months after Benjamin Netanyahu's return for a record 6th term as Prime Minister of Israel. Now, President Biden has held back the customary honor of inviting the Israeli Prime Minister to the White House. There is no White House invite for the Israeli Prime Minister on the horizon in the near term. If there isn't one by the end of this December, Netanyahu would probably become the first incoming Israeli premier not to get a White House visit in the first year of a term in over 5 decades. Now, so far, Biden has even stayed away from any other one-on-one get-together with Netanyahu. And why is that? We will decode. Now, to answer that question, we are being joined by our correspondent Jody Cohen live on this broadcast from Renana. Welcome to the broadcast.
Hi, Ananya. So, that is really the question that Biden's detractors are asking is, why is it take? I was going to say, they've been asking, why has it taken so long for President Biden to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu? Israel and the US are long-term allies. They have a strategic partnership, and security and intelligence cooperation are said to be at their highest levels. But many commentators are suggesting that the reason for the delay is because the Biden administration is concerned on the issue of Israel's proposed judicial reform plans, as well as some policies like Israeli settlements. Now, a senior official in the Biden administration has suggested that there could be a meeting in the White House for Netanyahu by the end of the year, but that would depend on what happens with this crucial issue of judicial reform. Now, protests have been taking place outside the UN building against the judicial reform proposals, and even outside places like Netanyahu's hotel. Now, these have been small scale, largely by Israeli expat activists. But wherever he's gone, the protests have followed. They seem to be well organized, they're well funded. For example, they projected anti-Netanyahu messages on the UN building, and protesters are promising more surprises throughout the city through this visit. Now, this is proving to be, I should say, a distraction, particularly in the Israeli media, from Netanyahu's main message at the UNGA, which he said he wanted to be on Iran. And some commentators are suggesting that the protesters perhaps have gone too far, and the Prime Minister's office is asking if the protesters against judicial reform will also be protesting against the Iranian regime.
Right, Jody. Now, what else is likely to be on the agenda when the two leaders do sit down and talk?
So I think there are 3 other key issues. We know that certainly President Biden does want to talk about the issue of judicial reform. Netanyahu at the airport in Tel Aviv before he left for this trip, he said that his main focus was going to be on Iran's nuclear program and aggression in the region. And we know that Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, he held a protest during Iranian President Raisi's speech at the UNGA, holding up a sign in solidarity with Mahsa Amini and with the Iranian protesters against the regime outside the UN building. He was actually detained for that protest and then released. And we know that Saudi Arabia is likely to be on the agenda, and potential Israeli-Saudi normalization. President Biden, in his speech to the UNGA, he referred to expanding normalization in his speech. He also talked about the India, Middle East, Europe corridor and called it a groundbreaking effort. And he then spoke about countering China in this context. And of course, the Palestinians are likely to come up in their meeting too. President Biden is pushing for concessions to the Palestinians as part of any Saudi-Israel normalization. We know that some in the Israeli coalition would like to limit this to economic concessions, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has suggested that the Palestinian issue won't be an obstacle to peace when it comes to Saudi-Israel normalization.
Right, a lot seems to be on the table, Jody, there, and even if Netanyahu wants to focus on Iran, that cannot be the only focus. Biden is expected to speak about the judicial reform and the anger that Israel has been seeing for the past so many months now. But for now, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast, Jody, and getting us all those updates.